While there are a lot of documentaries on Netflix, not all of them are harrowing or memorable. One that does fit into those categories, though, is Death of the Pastor's Wife. It's an examination of abuse, torment, and a perversion of religion. When the body of Mica Miller was found at a North Carolina state park, her death was promptly ruled a suicide. But the case drew national attention after evidence surfaced that Mica, wife of John Paul Miller, the pastor of her family's church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, had claimed to be the victim in a stalking plot, even telling police officers she was afraid for her life a month before her death. So this is a 3-part docuseries that provides us with a ton of interviews with Mica's family and close friends. Their account are then reinforced by home videos, social media posts, church services, and sermons. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this story, just like I was, Mica Miller was a young woman who was very active in her church growing up and eventually married the church's pastor, John Paul, or J.P. Miller. But during their engagement and then well into their marriage, J.P.'s outward persona as a charismatic and loving pastor was shown to be a massive facade, hiding a manipulative, emotionally, sexually, and physically abusive true self. Now, after years of coercive control, Mica finally succumbed to the mental anguish and the torment, and then took her own life at the age of 30. Given all the context of her and JP's relationship, though, Mica's family and friends believe that there was more to what happened and the police were willing to investigate. There's a lot in this docuseries that's going to make you shake your head and seriously question how JP could remain as a pastor. He was something like 15 years older than her and met her when she was about 10, and then married her when she was about 23. I mean, that's a massive hit for me. But there are other circumstances surrounding the relationship that inside of the church setting can be used as their testimony, a story to show how they turn from sinful mistakes and use them then to be better Christians. And I get the whole forgiveness thing. As an ex-evangelical, I certainly understand the internal politics and ongoing spiritual hypocrisy that exists within the church, and how the church structure is used to hide things that should never be hidden or gloss over actions and behaviors, all in the name of redemption. But what we're shown through text, voicemails, audio recordings, and witness accounts, JP is a skis-ball who, in the eyes of the church, is morally deviant. For those of us outside the church, we'd use some more adjectives to describe his actions: manipulator, abuser, tyrant, serial cheater, maybe even a word that sounds like great but doesn't have the G at the front. And throughout these actions, we are shown social posts, journal entries, recordings, church appearances, all that demonstrate the steady mental and physical decline that Mica was experiencing. She did her best to keep a tough and positive demeanor, but when listening to the words, she was saying so much during these times without always spelling out directly. But what was explicitly said, she told her family and friends, and they have receipts. All throughout the series, portions of JP's sermons are interspersed to reinforce whatever an interview might be covering. And while these do come across as damning, we're also only being shown a soundbite of a talk, so it is manipulative on the part of the series to include these statements without their full context, especially for anyone that's never attended an evangelical church sermon. That being said, though, I have heard sermons exactly like the ones JP is spouting in these clips. And so, I do know that the words, content, ideas, meanings, even context, they're not being manipulative, but instead are an accurate representation of his true thoughts and message, as so many times sermons focus on the duties of a wife to her husband, whether that be to not question his authority, to always submit to his sexual desires and wishes, and to be supportive in spite of herself. What this really translates to is that women are property for use by the man however they see fit, and are not to question their place within a relationship. And this is what is also shown from Mica. It's funny, so many times when people spout warnings or decrees, they're often telling on themselves. And in this case, JP was spelling out so many of his failings while wrapping it in something spiritual and authoritative. The storytelling for this docuseries is compelling, but utterly heartbreaking as each minute passed. I could feel my disgust and anger rise, watching how JP would wield scripture and pervert its meanings so that he could exert ongoing control over Mica, and at the same time then justify it to his congregation, creating this vision for them about himself that he was a loving and dedicated husband who just happened to have a wife who was struggling both mentally and emotionally because he was the mouthpiece of the church. His word was golden. So, if JP said Mica was in a mentally deteriorated state, most of the congregation would accept it and then extend sympathy all without question. Now, Thankfully, the documentary doesn't focus a ton on Mica's death. There's enough shown and told to us that we understand the context and what the police found, along with all the reactions that came after. Now, some of the circumstances, they do feel sketchy and certainly raise questions on culpability. But regardless of that, the one thing that is clearly defined and illustrated within this is how much JP influenced and contributed to Mica's death, even if he didn't pull the trigger. It's a tough one to watch. I mean, the sadness, it can be overwhelming, even when it's offset by so much footage of happy and bubbly Mica before she got involved with JP. The series is effective in demonstrating the way any pastor, and here JP in particular, exerts influence and control to coerce, force, manipulate, and ultimately justify terrible behaviors if they just wrap it in scripture. The documentary doesn't aim to showcase religion as a culprit, but instead one man's corruption of it and then his abusive actions toward the person he supposedly loved. The filming and editing are excellently captured, presenting an engaging story backed by a ton of evidence. This isn't going to leave you feeling encouraged or happy, but it is a powerful account that should serve as a cautionary tale and an awakening for anyone trapped in a relationship such. There's no sex, but descriptions of sexual abuse, no nudity, some profanity, and then descriptions of violence just containing multiple forms of abuse. Now, as a reminder, I don't give couch ratings to documentaries, but I highly recommend checking out Death of a Pastor's Wife on Netflix. Okay, have you heard about this story? Were you aware of it? What do you think happened in her death? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.